The digital clock on the flight line read exactly 0529 when the silence at Bandar Abbas was shattered. First, a single engine screamed to life, followed by another, then 4 more, until the tarmac vibrated with the roar of all 16 engines. 16 MiG-29 Fulcrums, representing the absolute peak of Iran's air superiority capabilities, rolled onto the runway. These jets were piloted by their most experienced aviators and carried a strike package that had been rehearsed with obsessive care. In the darkness above the Strait of Hormuz, the Revolutionary Guard Air Force was executing a plan they had wargamed for years. They had debated it in committee rooms, killed the plan, revived it, and killed it again. But on this specific Tuesday morning in the Persian Gulf, the theoretical became operational. Someone at the very top of the Iranian command structure had looked at the position of the USS Abraham sitting in the northern Arabian Sea and made the decision that would define the decade. Throttles were pushed forward, afterburners were lit, and 16 aircraft climbed into the pre-dawn sky. However, the element of surprise was already lost. 40 miles away, an E-2D advanced Hawkeye was already on station, watching. The Iranian plan was genuinely sophisticated, and that fact matters immensely for understanding the engagement that followed.
Tehran had not simply ordered 16 fighters to charge blindly at a supercarrier. This attack had a distinct architecture. Alpha Squadron dropped low, flying just 50 feet above the wave tops. They were riding the sea clutter, attempting to disappear beneath the radar horizon in a tactical maneuver that had theoretically worked against older defense systems. While they hugged the water, Bravo Squadron climbed high and immediately started broadcasting. Their role was electronic warfare, flooding American frequencies with noise designed to blind, confuse, and overwhelm the sensors. Then there was Charlie Squadron. These 4 pilots understood with complete clarity that they were the tip of the spear. They were armed with new anti-ship missiles and were the ones who had to actually put ordnance on the American carrier. Finally, Delta Squadron broke wide in a completely different direction, a classic decoy designed to split American attention, divide their resources, and introduce hesitation into American decision-making at the worst possible moment. On paper, it was a textbook multi-axis saturation approach. It was layered, coordinated, and difficult to defend against cleanly. But in practice, the operation was already bleeding before the MiGs even crossed the coastline. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye had been orbiting for hours. Its rotating radar dish was sweeping continuously, utilizing the APS-145 system, which was built specifically to find low-flying aircraft over water. This is a capability the United States has refined over decades of watching exactly this kind of threat develop. Alpha Squadron's sea-skimming run, the move Iranian planners had considered their most survivable approach, was detected within minutes of takeoff. It was not detected at the coastline, nor at the radar picket line, but at the moment of takeoff. Yet the failure of secrecy went even deeper. An American reconnaissance satellite had flagged unusual activity at Bandar Abbas fully 40 minutes before the first MiG left the ground. The pattern recognition was unambiguous. It spotted the pre-launch sequencing, the weapons loading, and the fuel trucks. By the time the Iranian pilots were strapping into their cockpits, the Combat Information Center on the Abraham Lincoln had already received the alert. They had already begun shifting their defensive posture and had already started the cascade of decisions that would determine the next one. The atmosphere aboard the carrier shifted instantly from routine patrol to controlled chaos as the call for battle stations resonated through the steel hull. The flight deck, usually a ballet of dangerous choreography, became electric with a specific kind of urgency that only comes when the threat is real and inbound. Exactly 8 minutes after the initial detection of the hostile formation, the catapults were already firing. 4 FA-18F Super Hornets were airborne and climbing aggressively into the intercept box. Their APG-79 AES radars were already reaching out ahead, painting a target picture that was being fed directly to them from the E-2D Hawkeye orbiting miles away. This was network-centric warfare in real time. Following the initial wave, 4 more Hornets launched within minutes, reinforcing the combat air patrol.
However, the most critical asset in the air might not have been the missile trucks, but the EA-18G Growler. This electronic warfare aircraft, which had been on patrol since before the MiGs even launched, turned its nose toward the incoming threat and began its invisible work. Simultaneously, across the entire strike group, the Aegis combat system woke up with terrifying efficiency. The SPY-1D phased array radar on the USS Lady Gulf acquired the MiG-29 formation within 90 seconds of the first radar returns. The system saw 16 tracks, and it generated 16 fire control solutions. It had already sorted them by threat priority, calculated the complex intercept geometries required for a kill
kill and loaded that targeting data into the vertical launch cells buried deep below the decks. Down in the Combat Information Center, the destroyer's crews stood at their stations, watching symbols on a screen. The numbers on their displays represented aircraft, but those numbers were also people. The training, however, is designed specifically to suppress that second realization. This is what modern aerial warfare actually looks like. It is stripped of the cinematic romance of a dogfight. Instead, it happens at distances so vast that the combatants never actually see one another. The outcome is resolved by physics, closing speeds, and algorithms long before any human instinct can intervene. In this engagement, the Hornets launched their ordnance from beyond 60 miles. AIM-120D AMRAAMs dropped off the rails, their rocket motors igniting as their active radar seekers went hot. Each missile accelerated to Mach 4, turning relentlessly toward a target it had been programmed to find and destroy. At that exact moment, the EA-18G Growler's jamming pods went to full power. They flooded the Iranian radar warning receivers with high-intensity electronic noise, effectively destroying the situational awareness the Iranian pilots needed to execute their countermeasures. The Growler did not fire a single bullet because it simply did not need to. It severed the electronic nervous system of the Iranian formation, disrupting the data links between aircraft and scrambling the coordinated picture that made a multi-squadron attack coherent. In seconds, it turned 16 aircraft flying a synchronized assault into 16 aircraft flying alone in a digital fog they could not see through. But the Iranian pilots were veterans who had trained for this fog. Alpha Squadron took the first hits of the exchange. 2 aircraft went down immediately in the opening volley, their ejection seats firing and parachutes opening over the warm waters of the Gulf. The third MiG, with its radar warning receiver screaming a lock tone, broke hard. In a display of genuine skill, the pilot managed to defeat an incoming missile with a combination of chaff dispension and a violent displacement maneuver that he had rehearsed 1,000 times in simulation. He turned west and ran, shaken but still flying. The fourth pilot broke south. The scorecard for Alpha was bleak. 2 MiGs lost, 2 running. Alpha was finished as a fighting unit.
Bravo Squadron had always been, in operational terms, a sacrificial lamb. By flying at high altitude and broadcasting electronic emissions like a lighthouse, they were designed to draw fire. One AMRAAM found its mark almost immediately. A second Bravo pilot, watching his wingman disappear from his scope, pulled a last-second high-G turn that put him outside the missile's terminal guidance envelope by less than 200 meters. That is a margin so thin it belonged more to luck than to skill. He turned for home without firing a shot, and the remaining 2 Bravo aircraft followed him. Their jamming had partially worked. It was not enough to blind the American fleet, but it was enough to complicate the picture. 1 more MiG was gone. However, that jamming had bought Charlie Squadron something precious. Charlie pressed on. These were Tehran's best pilots, selected for this specific mission precisely because Iranian planners understood that if anyone was going to break through the American screen, it would have to be through professionalism, discipline, and sheer determination to close the distance. The Growler's jamming was real, but it was not total. In the noise and confusion of the electronic environment, Charlie's flight lead found a seam in the coverage. He flew it. His wingman flew with him. They pushed the geometry hard, accepting risks that a rational threat assessment would have ruled out, and they got close enough to release. 2 new anti-ship missiles came off the rails. The Aegis system on the USS Lady Gulf had firing solutions on both projectiles within 4 seconds. SM-2 interceptors launched from the destroyer's deck. One incoming missile, the Nor, was killed cleanly 18 miles out. The second missile, however, defeated its first interceptor. This was a genuine achievement of Iranian missile engineering, with the seeker head performing exactly as designed against the SM-2's terminal guidance. It continued inbound, racing toward the fleet, but the American defenses are layered for this exact reason. A second SM-6 was already in the air. The Nor flew for another 9 seconds before the SM-6 intercepted and killed it just 6 miles from the strike group. In those same 9 seconds, the 2 Charlie pilots who had managed to launch were engaged by AMRAAMs from the Hornet section. 1 pilot ejected. 1 made it out, suffering from low fuel, and 1 engine degraded by a proximity detonation. His aircraft was trailing a faint smoke line visible to the Hornet crews watching from 15 miles away. He crossed back into Iranian airspace, barely keeping the airframe flying. Delta Squadron had already gone. The decoy flight turned south the moment the shooting started, their mission rendered pointless by the failure of American forces to be deceived by anything. American controllers tracked all 4 Delta aircraft all the way back to Iranian airspace. The message their departure sent needed no interpretation. 17 minutes after the first AMRAAM launched, the last Iranian radar contact faded.